twisted pair over 100
Oh,
meters.
I was going to say, I was just told by somebody on Google Plus that 10G over copper is not possible. Right, just not too much.
Exactly. I remember being in 2003 at a IEEE meeting where half of the room were saying it's not possible, and the other half saying it's going to be way too much power. And so the first group was wrong. The second one was initially right. And that's why it took time for the first products to be adopted in the market, because it was too high power in the beginning. Now, that has changed when, in particular, Quantia, of course some of the other TNG-based players as well, in the past couple of years have been able to deliver low-power TNG-based heat to the data centers. And so, Quantia in particular is leading the market. We have about 70% market share in delivering 10G-based heat to the servers. And the key point, as you may remember, and Wayne, you know that history very well. Once the base heat chip gets down on the motherboard of the server, it's a hockey stick. Right. And Gigabit Ethernet, that happened in 2002. And you see the curve, you see forward to quarter, being very small, and it suddenly gets on the motherboard and poof, it takes off. Right. The difference between the Gigabit Ethernet adoption and the 10 gig is that at the time, in 2002, it got adopted very quickly on the client side and into enterprise. There's no notion of data center, as we know it today. Right. And so the 10 gig, on the other hand, is a completely different dynamic. 10 gig gets in the data center first, right, and then it moves to the enterprise. So what we're all about is to deliver those 10G-based solutions, 10G-based chips, into the data center, which is now happening in large volume, into the servers on the motherboard, on the data card, whatever that is, and then on the switch on the other side of that link. So whether it's a top-of-rack switch, end-of-row, modular switch, or whatever, you get 10 gig connectivity now at a very low power, very low cost on both sides of that wire. And now finally, 10 gig is reality. The volume is picking up. We just passed the 1 million port milestone in January. So, which is for any company, anyone, any point milestone. So that should tell you a couple of things. One is that there's always discussions about optical. Optics is going to get there. Electrical is not going to be able to get to that next speed 10 times faster. Only optical will be able to do that. That's what we heard for gigabit Ethernet. That's what we heard for 10 gig. And the reality is, the early adopters are adopting an optical lane first, because that's all there is. It's very, very expensive. You heard Andy Belshon yesterday saying, I can get 40 gig optical, I can get 100 gig optical, but it's 100 or 1,000 times too expensive. And that's exactly the point. If you really need the speed, you can get it with optical, but that's a small volume. Whenever you need whenever you look at large deployment, massive deployment, ain't gonna happen with optics. I'm talking about the short connectivity. I'm talking about the access and the data center side. Deep inside the data center, between the server and the switch. There's no question that as soon as you leave that short connectivity rail, moving out of the data center, everything is optical. And it's been for many years. But when you talk about the short connectivity, all the piping, all the plumbing between the server and the switches, that's 90% right now. On right now servers, 90% of what was shipped last year was gigabit Ethernet. Right, 90% of the gigi was copper, was electrical. So effectively 80% of all servers shipping last year, the right now, were 1,000-based Ethernet. Right. Which is,
I'm surprised.
When we had the discussion yesterday, you said, oh, I thought it was 100%.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the point. Is it's very, very much a overwhelmingly the case that is placed in and it's going to be. Now we're transitioning now to 10 gig in the data center. Do you have any idea why that is? What's the driver?
SAN reputation.
Oh, okay. From an application perspective, I was thinking more in terms of the technologies. What is actually enabling that move to 10 gig in the data center?
Is that GPU copper?
Multiplexing.
Okay. I was thinking more in terms of the server itself. with the Romley generation that was launched last year. Now finally with the Intel Xeon E5 processors, you had 20 to 40 gig of bandwidth in and out of that processor.
Right.
And so, you know, you buy this rack mount server, what do you do with all that bandwidth? If you stick a gigabit Ethernet on that server, you're really not leveraging the investments you made in the server grade, right? And so what's happening here is you have a confluence of a couple of things. One is the processor now is pumping 20 to 40 gig of bandwidth. And finally, a 10 gig base T, low cost and low power was made available at the same time. So that confluence of those two elements, of which you're participating in one of them.
And there's not the insignificant issue that you don't have to pull new cable.
Well,
That's a significant issue.
So that's an interesting point, Wayne, because I actually don't think that's so much of an issue or a concern in a data center.
Yeah, I think it is.
Because
having talked to the people in data centers, they don't want to have to pull those hundreds of miles of new cable because the cost is prohibitive. But if they can use the same infrastructure, they'll be happy to go to faster service.
Right. So what's interesting is when you look at the growth pattern of equipment deployment, we're clearly not on a linear curve. And so when you think about whatever you've deployed so far in gigabit Ethernet and what that represents in terms of what you have to build 5 years to support what you need 5 years from now, right? It's a small portion because you're on a curve and you've got.
The thing is, it's not. It costs you more to cable for a server than it does to buy the server. Because when you count manpower, not the cost of the material.
Right.
When you count the manpower and everything else, and the downtime, it costs you more to cable it than it does to buy the server.
So I'll ask you a question, Wayne. So do you think that in data centers, people will actually keep their existing equipment in cable?
If they can.
If they can, and then upgrade the equipment?
Yeah, if they can.
Rather than just adding extra capacity? Because we're seeing that.
Yeah, I think they will because they've got to. The whole thing is a cost.
Right.
If it's cheaper to buy more servers, they'll buy more servers. If it's cheaper to buy better servers and not have to put in new cable, which it is,
Right. Yeah.
not always, then they'll do that. So they'll happily go to 10 gig if they can with the existing infrastructure because it's way less expensive.
And so we're seeing both. And in both cases, 10G basically wins. Why? Because 90% of what was deployed so far in DD was already category cables, category 6, 8, sometimes even on gigabit Ethernet, right? Which is what 10 gig runs on. 10 gig runs on Cat 6 or Cat 6. Right. So then you can upgrade your infrastructure, server switch to 10 gig without changing your cable. Absolutely. Yeah. And the thing that's happening with 10G based T is that it's also capable of supporting the previous speed. So it will auto-negotiate down to gigi if you happen to upgrade your server but not your switch. So your switch may be a gigi, your server moves to 10 gig. It will recognize that the best it can do is gig, and it will run at gigabit until
And then when the time
you
comes, you upgrade your switch,
Exactly.
and all of a sudden
everything
at 10 gig.
What's really interesting is that what we're hearing from the data center operators is that they have been deploying on green installs, so adding capacity. Cat 6A in the trace.
And that's what they do.
Waiting for the equipment.
Because it's so much less expensive to spend the extra 5 to 8% that it costs to do Cat 6A versus Cat 6, that they will put that in, knowing that they're helping to future-proof it. They'll at least slow things down, but they won't have to go out right away and buy new cable. And that's such an incredible expense that they will do that. That way they know when they're putting the new servers in, they can pop them into place and plug them in and ready to go. Same with the new switches.
So I'm curious to hear, from your perspective, what you're hearing, the difference between those who deployed 10 gigabit in the past 4 or 5 years versus those that are going to be deploying 10 gig in the next 4 or 5 years, because we happen to believe that those are different evil. they tend to be different types of deployments, different type of applications. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether you're hearing that as well.
I haven't broken that down in a particular way. I've seen companies doing both, and I've seen them doing both for different reasons. Companies with existing data centers generally try not to change the data center if they don't have to because it costs so much money. And it's people building new data centers will try to get it as upgraded as far as possible, as quickly as possible. So they don't have to buy it later. But the situation you're running across is that when you're reach the end of life of a data center, what do you do next?
Right.
And I think that
Straight out or
yeah.
build on top.
And I think what's happening is the general view is now becoming you start with a clean building. You just pull everything out, it all goes to the recycle center, and you start again. Again, it may cost more in materials, but the labor is cheaper. And labor is the most expensive thing you have to deal with these days. Yeah. So the data center will be a large warehouse-like building that you then clean out and put your stuff in.
And so, you know, so from just piggybacking on what you just said, what we've seen in the past 4 or 5 years is high frequency trading type of applications, high performance computing.
That's a whole different situation. And then not only do you have to do a whole new data center every single time,
right?
You've got to have it as close as possible to the traders to minimize speed of light delays.
Right. Yes. And these types of deployments will be very cost insensitive.
Right. They don't care.
They don't care about the cost. And so when you hear about 40 gig, 100 gig, as we had yesterday,
yeah,
that's the kind of applications. That's what you get the headline. Optical 400 gig, right? That's what you hear about and being talked about. But the volume of this is very small. And so if there's one message to remember here is that that's where that's what you see in the headlines. But down in the deep in the trenches, what's happening is that the 10 gig adoption in mass, right, massive deployments of 10 gig is actually not driven by high frequency trading. It's not driven by high performance computing. Those guys have already moved to 40 gig and 100 gig. Those who are deploying the 10 gig in the next 4 or 5 years are general purpose computers, corporate data centers, and those are very cost sensitive.
Yes.
That's where the volume is.
But the advantage with the high volume trading is that they at least give you a test bed so you find out what actually works, which is really nice because it lowers the cost for everybody else. And those guys who are cost sensitive will have benefited from the experience gained by people who don't care about the cost.
Yeah, yeah. The other consequence of this kind of the differences in applications and deployment is that the early adopters didn't have much choices for switches and servers to pick from. The good example of that is Google. Right. They had so little choices that they actually decided to do it themselves because there's nothing available 5, 6, 7 years ago. So they went on and designed their own switches and servers, and there you go. They were the first one to deploy 10 gig. They're already on 40 and 100 gig. Okay. And these architectures were characterized by what's called the shrink wrap rack. And what I mean by that is entire rack full of equipment, already cabled, were being moved into the data center with all the servers in, and top of the switch already cabled.
Now they're doing modular containers already out there.
Yeah, exactly. The containers already moved. Complete container already cabled.
Everything ready to go. You plug it in.
See, all plug it, right? Move in, plug it. That's not the mass volume.
No, I know.
The mass adoption is different. Mass adoption I can characterize by a data center operator I was talking to recently. It's a large operation. They've got 12 data centers around the world, thousands of servers per data center. And they sell infrastructure as a service. And when you sell infrastructure as a service, what's happening is your customer may say, well, you know, this is the kind of parameters that I'm looking for. Okay, so that's going to drive into a Cisco switch. This is the kind of stuff that I'm looking for in virtualization and virtual machines. That's going to drive this kind of server. And they may not be the same brand. And for that particular deployment, you may not want to have a customized switch. You may want to go directly, east-west, directly from the server to monitor the switch. And so what happens in all those scenarios is they're very different. They usually are zoned. So in other words, you've got racks and racks of servers in this zone, and then you've got racks and racks of switches in another place. And now you need to cross over 20, 30, 50, 100 meters of distance. Right? And so the only alternative that you have then is optical or base T again. Optical is about 4 or 5 times more expensive. So that type of deployment will favor base T as it had in gigabit Ethernet, as it had before in different markets. I know we're going to be running short on time, but I want to leave you with also the idea that that 10G base T, well, base gigabit Ethernet, 1000 base T, as I said before, went into the enterprise first, and then went to SMB solo consumer. With 10 gig, we got into this data center first. So the next step after that is going into the enterprise, and I'm looking up if I can find it. Yeah, here. Look at those trays. Yeah. All of those are Cat 5e or Cat 6 or Cat 6, probably Cat 6 or 6 unshielded twisted pair.
Right.
The good old twisted pair, base T, right? And that's the enterprise environment I'm talking about. The more mobile devices you have, we heard about the AC today, the more bandwidth you get access to from your mobile device at gigabit speed, right? AC is gigabit speed wireless. And the more clients you have connected to that access.
By the way. That's actually a myth.
Well, it will go to the maximum.
It's a myth.
Okay.
I have the test
Tell
to
me.
prove it.
Anyway,
You're lucky to get 600 megabits out of it. Absolutely full-fledged 11AC system. Because
First switch?
Wi-Fi's got so much overhead. that,
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
It won't go that fast.
But what's interesting is, in particular with the wave 2 of AC, is you're going to have so much traffic on those high-end access points that a gigabit Ethernet on the back of those access points will be surged. And that's when we're going to be needing to upgrade all the infrastructure. And what do you want to do? Do you want to rip the cables with the fiber? No. What you want to do is leverage the infrastructure. So whether you're on a wired connectivity to your laptop, or mine, which is when we're using the RJ45.
I know you have one.
I still have one, that's an old one. But the new version of the MacBook Pro doesn't have it. I don't know if you noticed that. They dropped the RJ45. That's a Mac, yeah. But the new version of the same computer doesn't have the RJ45. It's all anymore. No, it doesn't. It's the same as a MacBook Air. They dropped it. My point is, whether you connect wired to your router or wirelessly to the access point, all of this traffic at some point will have to pass by. And so the infrastructure that you have in the enterprise, SMB solo and at home, all of this progressively will get upgraded to 10 gig. And so, history repeats itself. That's again the message. So, I'll leave you with that.
Okay.
Thanks for your time.
Cool. Do you have excuse me.
Yeah.
Cool. Do you have anything going on in the Southern Hemisphere? Radio New Zealand?
We're very much focused on the US because that's where all of the OEMs, all the large OEMs and switch and server are located. But certainly as you get in data center, but certainly as you get into the enterprise, then it becomes global. It's not just North America. It's going to be Europe, Asia, Latin America, and so on. But we're not going to see this directly. We're going to see this through our customers selling into those segments. Because the players who are in that segment are still a majority, vast majority US. And then a few, Europe as well, and then China. Very good. Well, if you have any questions, you have my card.
Yep, I have your card.
And Wayne, I'll certainly follow up with you. So I'd love to expand on some of the discussions and maybe do a nice article. Okay.
Okay, let me see. I just
That would be